It all started with the festival. The lineup was announced in the spring, and for 3 months, it was all my friends and I could talk about. A 3-day rave out in the middle of nowhere with every DJ we worshipped. It wasn't just a concert. It felt like a rite of passage. We were all 19, 20 years old, and we knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the most important event of our lives. Of course, we were all broke. We scraped together just enough money for tickets by working miserable summer jobs. But we didn't just want to be there. We wanted the full experience. We wanted to reach another level. So we made a decision. We would pool every single dollar we had left and buy a massive amount of MDMA. It seemed like a genius plan. My friend Josh was the one who knew a guy. We collected all our money, a pile of crumpled 20s and 10s from our fast food paychecks, and drove to a Wendy's parking lot. I remember the feeling of handing over that much cash. It was everything we had in the world. The guy didn't say much, just took the envelope and gave us a heavy little baggie filled with brownish crystals. We had never seen so much in one place. Driving away, we felt invincible. We were 4 friends with a bag of what we thought was pure magic and tickets to the greatest party on earth. We looked at that bag like it was the key to the universe. This wasn't just getting high. We were completely convinced that this weekend would be the peak of our entire lives. The one perfect story we would tell forever. We had no idea what we had just done. We got to the festival grounds just as the sun was starting to set. The energy was electric. Thousands of people were moving in a river toward the entrance, and you could feel the bass from a distant stage vibrating in your chest. It was overwhelming, but not in a bad way. It was exactly what we had been dreaming about for months. We were finally here. We found a spot on a slight hill overlooking the main stage, a huge, monstrous structure that was still dark and silent. The opening acts were playing on smaller stages scattered around the fields, but we didn't care about them. We had our own main event to prepare for. We sat in a small circle on the grass, the nervous energy making it impossible to hold a real conversation. My friend Josh kept patting his pocket, making sure the little baggie was still there. We were all just looking at each other, grinning like idiots, completely filled with a mix of excitement and pure, undiluted anxiety. It felt like we waited for an eternity. The sky went from orange to purple to black. The crowd around us swelled, becoming a dense sea of bodies. Then it happened. The main stage lights went out completely. A deep, expectant silence fell for just a second. And then the entire crowd of 50,000 people roared as one. This was it. Josh pulled out the bag of brownish crystals. He didn't even have to say anything. We all knew. He poured a small pile into each of our hands. My own was shaking slightly as I looked at the little mound in my palm. We made eye contact, one last time, a silent promise. And then, as the first synth note of the headliner's set echoed across the field, we all took our dose in perfect unison. Right at that moment, a blinding white light erupted from the stage, and the first massive beat dropped like a physical blow. The first 15 minutes were pure sensory overload. The bass hammered through the grass and into my bones, and the lights were a strobing universe of pure color. We were all dancing, or at least moving, caught up in the force of the crowd. I was waiting for that first wave, that familiar warm rush that signals the beginning of everything. We kept looking at each other and smiling, nodding along to the beat, all of us pretending it was already starting. An hour passed. The DJ was playing a flawless set, and the energy of the crowd was building into something almost religious. All around us, people were ecstatic. Faces were beaming, strangers were hugging each other, their hands were in the air. It was exactly what we had imagined. But for us, it was just a show we were watching from the outside. The nervous excitement had completely faded, and it was replaced by a cold pit in my stomach. The smiles between us were gone. We just shot each other quick, worried looks. After 90 minutes, there was no denying it. There was nothing. No warmth, no tingle, no sudden, overwhelming love for everyone in a 50-foot radius. There was just the thudding music and the sour taste of disappointment in the back of my throat. I finally turned to my friend Mark and just said it. I feel nothing. He shook his head, his eyes wide with a kind of quiet panic. Me neither, he said. It's fake. That was it. The word just hung there between us. Fake. We'd been ripped off. All our money was gone, and what we had taken was probably just a bag of brown sugar or crushed up caffeine pills. And the real horror of it started to sink in. We were trapped. We were stone cold sober in the middle of 50,000 people having the absolute time of their lives. The music that was supposed to be our anthem was just noise. The joy on everyone else's face felt like a personal insult. We were watching our perfect moment, the one we had saved and starved for, happen to everyone but us. For a few minutes, we just stood there, frozen. The bass from the stage was so strong it felt like it was trying to restart our hearts, but we were completely hollowed out. I remember looking at Josh. He was just staring at the stage, his face completely blank. No one said a word. The crowd around us was one single living thing, surging and screaming with joy, and we were just 4 statues in the middle of it. The gap between us and them felt 1,000,000 miles wide. Then Mark just turned and started pushing his way out of the crowd. He didn't say where he was going. He didn't have to. We followed him in a line, like a sad, silent funeral procession. The walk back to our tent felt like it took hours. We had to pass all the other stages, all the other parties, all these little pockets of perfect happiness that we were supposed to be a part of. We didn't make eye contact. I think we were all blaming each other and ourselves, and mostly Josh. But no one had the energy to say it. Back at the tent, we just collapsed. A few of us sat on the cooler, the rest on the damp grass. The music was still audible, a distant party we weren't invited to. All our money was gone. Every last dollar we'd worked for all summer, handed over in a fast food parking lot for a bag of garbage. One of us, I don't remember who, just started to laugh. It was a horrible, dead sound. Then we all were, crying and laughing at the same time at how unbelievably stupid we had been. I've told other stories about bad experiences. Bad trips, terrifying moments, thinking you were going to die. This wasn't one of them. There's a different kind of trauma that comes from being scammed. It isn't the loud, screaming terror of losing your mind. It's the quiet, sinking feeling of being a fool. There's no adrenaline, no war stories to tell later. There's only humiliation. You feel like a mark. You see the signs you should have seen a week too late. The brownish crystals, the guy who said nothing, the desperate need for it to be real. And that's what really kills you. It's the death of the perfect moment. We had spent months building this weekend up in our minds. It was supposed to be the story we told for the rest of our lives. Instead, it became this empty space, this thing we never, ever talked about again. The money was gone, but that wasn't the real loss. The real loss was that perfect version of the memory, the one that never got to happen. It was stolen from us, and you can never get that back. I wasn't a kid. I considered myself an experienced psychonaut, someone who approached these things with respect and a healthy dose of paranoia. For years, My entire philosophy was built around harm reduction. I never took a substance without testing it. I never tripped without carefully planning my set and setting. I kept trip killers on hand. I was meticulous, maybe even a little bit arrogant about how professional I was with my own brain. My sourcing was part of that pride. I'd long ago graduated from sketchy local dealers. I navigated the darknet with confidence. I spent hours reading vendor reviews, checking forums, and vetting every single source before I ever sent a cent of crypto. I saw it as a skill. It was the only way to guarantee you were getting exactly what you paid for, free of dangerous research chemicals or bunk product. I'd had 100 successful transactions without a single issue. I trusted the system because I was so good at working it. One evening, I was browsing for a new sheet of LSD. I was planning a deep solo trip, something to help me work through some things. I stumbled upon a new vendor. They had almost no sales history, but their listing was for pure 150 microgram tabs. And the price was unbelievable. It was less than half of what any reputable vendor was charging. Every alarm bell that I'd trained myself to have should have been screaming. Too good to be true. It's always a scam, or it's something else entirely. But the price was just so tempting. I thought to myself, maybe they're just new. Maybe they're trying to build a reputation by undercutting the market. It was a stupid rationalization, born from greed. I broke my own rules. I placed the order. A few weeks later, a discreet little envelope arrived, looking just as professional as any other. I had no idea that a simple sheet of blotter paper was about to completely dismantle my reality. I decided to take them on a Saturday. Just like always, I prepared the space. The apartment was clean, my phone was off, and I had water ready. I saw myself as a professional, and I followed my own procedures. I took the sheet of blotter out of its foil. It looked perfect. I cut 2 tabs, a standard 300 microgram dose for me, and placed them on my tongue. Instantly, my mouth flooded with the taste. It wasn't a faint hint of ink. It was an overwhelming, sharp, chemical bitterness. A disgusting, metallic taste, like putting a 9-volt battery on your tongue. Every single alarm bell I had went off at once. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was wrong. Real LSD is tasteless. That is rule number 1. I had just broken my most important sourcing rule, and now I was paying for it. For a second I considered spitting it out, but it was too late. The bitter taste was already coating my throat. I just swallowed. A stupid panic decision. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it might just be a strange solvent used on the paper, that it would be fine. But I knew I was lying to myself. I just sat on my couch and I waited. The feeling in my gut was no longer anticipation. It was just pure, cold dread. It didn't take long. Within 20 minutes, something started. It wasn't the slow, gentle unfolding of a psychedelic trip. There was no warmth, no wonder, no shift in perception. It was a jagged, buzzing feeling that started in my teeth and spread through my whole body. My hands started to shake. My muscles felt tight and electrified, and a wave of chemical nausea rolled through my stomach. This wasn't a journey into my mind. I knew right then that I had just poisoned myself, and it was only just beginning. The buzzing in my teeth was no longer a sensation. It had become my entire state of being. My hands and feet went ice cold, even though sweat was starting to pour down my back. My jaw clamped down so hard I thought my teeth would crack. I tried to relax it, to unclench my muscles, but it was like they weren't mine anymore. They were being pulled tight by strings I couldn't see. My heart was no longer a beat. It was a frantic, irregular series of explosions in my chest. I could feel the panicked rhythm in my throat, in my ears. I pressed my fingers to my wrist to find my pulse, but my own hand was trembling too much to feel anything. I knew it didn't matter. I knew what was happening. This wasn't a difficult trip. This wasn't an ego death. This was a physical assault. The thought just circled and circled. I have been poisoned. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a bunk batch. That vendor, the one with the cheap prices, he had sent me poison. There were no beautiful patterns or flowing colors. The world around me started to glitch. The edges of my bookshelf, the frame of the window, they were vibrating, covered in a kind of angry digital static. Colors were not vibrant. They were sharp and sour. Reality didn't look like it was breathing. It looked like it was tearing itself apart at the seams. It was hostile. Everything I looked at seemed to be made of broken glass. There was no insight. There was no journey. There was just the pure, crushing weight of my body, turning against itself. Every nerve ending screamed with a toxic electricity. Every beat of my heart was a hammer blow announcing my own stupid, self-inflicted death. I was a professional, right up until the moment I became a complete fucking idiot. And now I was trapped in my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, completely alone, dying from a sheet of paper. The feeling in my chest was no longer a hammer blow. It was something physical, something real. A crushing weight started in the center of my sternum and radiated outwards, a hot, agonizing pressure. Then my left arm went numb. All of it, from the shoulder to the fingertips, just went dead and cold. It was a textbook heart attack. I knew the signs. I had poisoned myself, and now my heart muscle was dying. My vision started to shrink into a tight, strobing tunnel. The digital static at the edges of my reality was closing in, eating the world. A single panicked thought took over my entire brain. My body is shutting down. It wasn't a trip. It was a sequence. The heart was first. Then my lungs would forget how to breathe. Then my brain would just turn off like a faulty switch. I was a spectator to my own system failure, watching the vital functions shut down one by one. I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't respond. I just slid off the couch and collapsed onto the floor. Lying on the rug, staring up at the vibrating ceiling, I thought of my one core principle. The one rule every psychonaut lives by. You never, ever call for help. You handle it. You ride it out. Calling 911 is the ultimate failure, an admission that you've lost complete control. It means hospitals and police and explaining to doctors what you did while your brain is dissolving. It was the one line I swore I would never cross. But the sheer animal terror was stronger than any principle I ever had. The need to not die was more powerful than any code of conduct. I wasn't an explorer of consciousness anymore. I was just a terrified animal in a trap, chewing its own leg off to escape. My left arm was useless, so I dragged myself across the floor with my right arm, crawling toward the coffee table where my phone was. My hand was shaking so badly, I could barely grab it. I somehow unlocked it and hit the emergency call button. When the operator answered, I don't even know what I said. I think I just choked out the words, "I'm dying." I don't remember the ambulance ride. The next thing I remember is the fluorescent lights of an ER ceiling, buzzing with that same hostile energy I'd felt in my apartment. My body was still trembling, drenched in a cold sweat. But the worst of the heart attack feeling was gone. A nurse was there, checking the readouts on a machine next to me. After what felt like an eternity, a doctor came in. He asked me what I had taken. I told him LSD, 2 tabs. He looked at my chart, then back at me, and just shook his head. "Look," he said, "your heart is stable now, but your blood pressure and heart rate were through the roof. Whatever you took, it wasn't LSD. The symptoms, the bitterness you described, it was some kind of synthetic research chemical. An NBOMe, probably." The word synthetic hit me harder than the drug itself. The physical effects were already starting to fade. The frantic buzzing in my body was quietening down into a dull ache. But the doctor's words left a different kind of poison. I wasn't a psychonaut who had a bad trip. I was a victim. Some faceless vendor, chasing a few extra dollars, had knowingly sent me a dangerous, unpredictable chemical instead of what I'd paid for. That's the scar that never healed. People talk about HPPD, the fear of seeing tracers or visual snow for the rest of your life. I would have taken that over what I got. I got a crippling health anxiety, a permanent paranoid short circuit in my brain. To this day, any random pain, any muscle twitch, any moment my heart skips a beat, and the panic floods back in. The absolute certainty that my body is failing, that I've been poisoned again. It destroyed my ability to ever explore my own consciousness again. A trip requires a total surrender, a fundamental trust in the substance and in yourself. That trust is gone for me. It was broken forever in that ER. I didn't just break my own rules on sourcing. I gambled my life in a chemical lottery and barely got away with it. That door to the psychedelic world is now permanently welded shut, and the fear that put it there is something I have to live with every single day. My best friend's name was Leo. We'd known each other our entire lives since we were 5 years old. He was the charismatic one, the one everyone was drawn to. I was quiet and awkward, and for my whole life I had just existed in his orbit. He had this energy that made you want to be near him, but he also had a mean streak. He called it an advanced sense of humor. He liked to pull pranks, but his pranks always had a victim, and they were never funny for the person they were happening to. He'd do things like tell me a girl I liked was into me, just to watch me go make a fool of myself. Or he'd borrow my bike and leave it somewhere across town. Small acts of cruelty that he always laughed off. Because he was so charming, everyone else always laughed with him. I was just the butt of the joke. One night, we were at a huge house party. The kind of party I hated. The music was so loud it made your teeth hurt. The air was hot and smelled like sweat and spilled beer, and there were hundreds of people packed into every room. I didn't smoke much or do drugs. I was just standing in a corner, holding a cup, trying to be invisible. Of course, Leo found me. He pushed through the crowd with this huge grin on his face. He leaned in and shouted over the music, "You look like you're about to die of boredom." He held out a brownie wrapped messily in a paper towel. "Here, eat this. It'll help you loosen up." I was hesitant. I asked him what was in it. "Just some weed," he said, waving off my concern. "It's a chill one. I made them myself." He smiled at me, a wide, reassuring smile he'd used 1,000 times before. I decided to trust him. It was a stupid, life-changing mistake. I looked at the brownie in the crumpled paper towel. It was thick, a big corner piece, and it felt heavy. Part of me, the part that had been humiliated 12 times before, was screaming not to do it. But I was so tired of being the quiet one in the corner, overwhelmed by the noise and the crowd. I just wanted to fit in. I wanted to feel what everyone else seemed to be feeling. I looked at his smile, and I decided to believe him. So I ate it. Not just a piece, I ate the entire thing, shoving it into my mouth almost defiantly. It was dense and a little dry, and there was a strange, chemical taste to the chocolate that I ignored. I finished every last crumb and stood there, feeling like I'd finally committed to being part of the night. I looked up at him, expecting an approving nod or a friendly clap on the back. But the look on his face had changed. The reassuring smile was gone. It was replaced by a tight, knowing smirk. It was a look I knew all too well. It was the look he always had right before the punchline landed, the one that meant the joke was on me. My stomach instantly felt cold. He leaned in close, his mouth right next to my ear. He didn't shout over the music this time. He almost whispered it. "Good flight." Then he laughed, a short, sharp sound, clapped me hard on the shoulder, and just melted back into the crowd. I stood there, alone again. Good flight? What the hell did that mean? For a second, I tried to convince myself it was just some new slang, a weird thing people were saying. But I knew him. I knew that smirk. I had a horrible, sinking feeling that I had just made a terrible mistake. The brownie was a heavy weight in my stomach, and I had no idea what was coming. For maybe 10 minutes, I just stood there. The dread was a knot in my stomach, but nothing was happening. I started to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a normal brownie. Maybe good flight was just a stupid joke. Then a warmth started in my legs. It wasn't unpleasant. It was a slow, heavy feeling, like sinking into a warm bath. For just a moment, a single, stupid moment, I thought, okay, it's just weed. It's just strong, I can handle this. That thought was the last coherent thing I had for a long time. It wasn't a wave of relaxation. It was like a switch was flipped. The warmth became an intense burning heat that shot up my spine and into my head. The bass from the speakers was no longer something I heard with my ears. It was inside my skull, vibrating so hard my teeth ached. My heart started hammering, a frantic, wild rhythm that felt completely wrong. It wasn't a high, it was a physical assault. My vision started to stutter. The crowd of people dancing just a few feet away from me were no longer people. They were blurs of color, moving in fast, jerky frames like an old projector. The sound of their laughing and shouting warped into something monstrous, a distorted, demonic chorus. I could feel the music crawling on my skin. I knew then that this wasn't just weed. Leo hadn't just given me some strong pot. This was something else. This was a dose. A massive, horrifying dose meant to completely destroy me. I remembered the chemical taste, the heavy, dense feeling of the brownie. I remembered his smirk. The words "good flight" came back to me, but now they sounded like a death sentence. A hot, paralyzing wave of pure terror washed over me. I wasn't at a party anymore. I was trapped. I was in hell, and he had put me here on purpose. I had to get out. I had to get away from the noise, the lights, the people. But when I tried to move my legs, they felt like they were bolted to the floor. I was completely frozen. I was no longer frozen by terror. I was just frozen, a statue. My mind was screaming, trying to pull the levers to make my legs run or my arms fight. But all the wires had been cut. I was completely trapped inside a body that wouldn't respond. The party was 1,000,000 miles away. My own limbs were 1,000,000 miles away. All that was left was a single, looping thought. I'm broken. He broke my brain. This is permanent. This is what it feels like to be gone. The distorted sounds, the demonic choir of the party, started to change. It was like tuning a radio, the static slowly resolving into a signal. The horrible, warping noise began to coalesce into a single sound. It was laughter. It wasn't the happy laughter of a party. It was cruel and pointed. It was aimed at something. Then my vision started to clear. The strobing, jerky figures weren't a sea of faceless monsters anymore. They were just people. But they weren't all dancing. A small group of them had formed a semicircle. They were all looking in the same direction. They were all looking at me, and in the center of them was Leo. He was leaning forward, his hands on his knees, howling with laughter. His face was red, tears streaming from his eyes. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was hysterically, uncontrollably laughing. I saw him gasp for air and point a finger directly at my face. That's when I saw the phones. He had his out. The girl next to him had hers out. The guy on his other side, too. A whole circle of them, their faces illuminated by their screens, all aimed at me. They were filming. They were filming my catatonic, vegetative state. They were getting it all on video. The drug wasn't the joke. My terror wasn't a side effect. It was the entire point. My living nightmare was their entertainment. My body was a cage, and my consciousness was the terrified animal rattling the bars. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even close my eyes to make the image go away. I was forced to watch him, forced to watch them all. My vision was locked on Leo's face, contorted in absolute hysterics. The boy I grew up with, my best friend. His laughter wasn't a sound anymore. It was the only thing in reality. It drilled into my head, louder than the music, louder than my own frantic thoughts. I could feel it in my bones. It was a cruel, punishing rhythm. And with every gasp of air he took before another howl of laughter, I felt the betrayal cut deeper. This wasn't a joke that had gone too far. This was the destination. This was exactly what he wanted. Every small humiliation, every prank, every time he'd made me feel like a fool my entire life. It was all just a rehearsal for this, his magnum opus. He had finally found a way to completely paralyze me so I couldn't run, so I would be forced to just stand there and take it. This was a different kind of death. It wasn't a fear of my heart stopping. It was the feeling of myself being erased. I wasn't a person. I was a thing, an object of ridicule, a funny video. All the parts of me that made me me, my thoughts, my fears, my history, were gone. They were replaced by a single searing wave of pure shame. I was nothing but a punchline, and I was trapped on a stage with 1,000 lights on it, completely, totally alone. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. Hours, maybe. I have a vague memory of the party ending, the music stopping, the house slowly emptying out until it was just me and a few strangers passed out on couches. The laughter was gone. The phones were gone. Leo was gone. I walked home in the pre-dawn silence. The whole world felt thin and fragile, like a piece of paper I could punch a hole through. I never spoke to Leo again. He called a few days later, probably to tell me it was just a joke, to tell me to lighten up. I saw his name on the screen, and I just let it ring until it stopped. He never tried again. Our entire lifetime of friendship was just deleted. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a falling out. It was an execution. He had killed it that night, and there was nothing left to say. But the trip never really ended. For the first few months, I was living in a constant, low-grade version of it. I'd be in class or talking to my parents, and I would suddenly feel like I was watching a movie of my own life. I'd look at my own hands, and they wouldn't feel like they were mine. Nothing felt real. The world looked like a cheap simulation, and I was a spectator, not a participant. The feeling would come and go, but it was always there, waiting. Years later, a doctor gave it a name: depersonalization derealization disorder, a chronic dissociative state triggered by extreme trauma. The brain's emergency escape hatch gets stuck open, permanently separating you from reality so you can't get hurt again. That prank, that single act of casual cruelty, had fundamentally broken my brain's ability to feel safe in the world. That's the scar that never healed. It's not about the drug. It's about the betrayal. Leo proved to me that the person you trust most in the world can be the one to orchestrate your worst nightmare, just for a laugh. That night shattered my ability to ever feel truly connected or safe with another person. I learned that reality isn't something you can depend on, and that people aren't a safe harbor. They're just an audience, waiting for the punchline. My father died on a Tuesday. The days after that are a blur of phone calls and casseroles and people telling me he was in a better place. For the next 6 months, I lived in a thick fog. Grief wasn't like an emotion you could feel and then put away. It was a physical state. My bones felt heavy, my lungs never seemed to get enough air, and the world was just a flat, gray movie playing on a distant screen. I was completely hollowed out. Therapy felt pointless. Talking about it just made the memories sharper and more painful. I just wanted it to stop. I was desperate for anything that would provide a shortcut through the pain, a switch I could flip to make it all go away. I started spending my nights just scrolling online, searching for things I didn't have a name for. Spiritual healing, out-of-body experiences, anything. That's when I found the website. It was minimalist and clean, all earth tones and stock photos of serene-looking people in yoga poses. It advertised an urban shaman who conducted private San Pedro cactus ceremonies. The text was full of promises. It talked about the sacred medicine of the Andes, about purging trauma, and finding profound spiritual closure. One line hit me right in the chest. A chance to communicate with those who have passed on. I sent an email. The response was quick and professional. He called himself a facilitator. He said the ceremony could provide the healing I was looking for. There was a consultation, a diet to follow, and a price. The price was huge. It was almost everything I had in my savings. I didn't even hesitate. I saw it as a transaction. I was paying to see my dad one more time. I sent the money without a second thought, completely convinced that I was buying the cure for grief itself. The address he gave me was for a normal apartment building on a quiet, tree-lined street. There was no sign, no special entrance. I buzzed the number he'd sent, and the lock clicked open. The apartment itself was spare, almost empty. There were cushions laid out in a circle on the floor of the living room, and the air smelled faintly of incense. The facilitator, the shaman, greeted me at the door with a warm smile. He was a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a calm, deep voice that instantly put me at ease. There were 3 other people there, 2 women and another man, all around my age. We all had the same look on our faces, a mix of hope and desperation. We didn't talk much. We just found our cushions and sat, waiting for instructions. The facilitator explained that the medicine, the San Pedro, would connect us to ourselves and to the spirit world. He spoke with a quiet confidence that made everything feel real and safe. He went into the small kitchen and turned on a blender. The sound was horribly out of place, a normal household noise in the middle of this sacred moment. He brought out a pitcher filled with a thick, greenish-brown liquid. He poured it into 4 small ceramic cups and handed one to each of us. He told us to drink it all at once. I lifted the cup and the smell hit me. It was earthy and deeply bitter. I took a breath and drank it down. It tasted like I was drinking dirt and bile, a thick, gritty sludge that was hard to swallow. I gagged, but I got it down. We all did. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the horrible taste coating our mouths. Then, slowly, a warmth started in my stomach. A gentle, pleasant heat that began to spread through my whole body. The facilitator dimmed the lights. He lit another stick of incense and sat in the center of our circle. He told us to close our eyes and focus on our intentions. Mine was simple. I just wanted to see my dad, just once more. As the warmth spread up into my chest, he began to chant. It was a low, humming sound that seemed to make the very air in the room vibrate. It was beautiful and hypnotic. I let the sound wash over me, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of real hope. I was convinced it was working. The gentle warmth I had felt began to burn. It wasn't painful, but it was electric and uncomfortable. The shaman's hypnotic chanting was no longer a beautiful sound washing over me. It felt like it was coming from inside my own skull, a frantic, looping rhythm that made my teeth ache. The edges of the room began to soften and breathe. I tried to hold on to that feeling of hope, that clear image of my dad. But it was slipping away. My mind felt like a wet piece of paper that was starting to tear. All of a sudden, the chanting stopped. The silence was sharp and loud. The shaman was looking around the circle, but his eyes were unfocused, as if he was seeing something else layered over our reality. He started to speak, but his words were a confusing jumble. He talked about tethering the soul and clearing energetic debris. He would point at one of the women and say her aura was turning yellow. Then he'd look at me and say there was a shadow clinging to my back. His guidance wasn't calm and confident anymore. It felt scattered and intrusive. I couldn't follow any of it. Then his gaze locked onto me. His kind eyes were gone, replaced by an unnerving intensity. He saw right through me. "You," he said, his voice cutting through my confusion. "The grief has made a hole. Something is trying to get out, and something else is trying to get in." He stood up in one fluid motion, towering over us. "The medicine is showing me what needs to be done. Come with me." The other three people didn't even open their eyes. They were lost in their own worlds. I felt a spike of pure panic. I was being singled out. My body moved without my permission. I just stood up and followed him as he walked out of the living room and down a short, dark hallway. He opened a door at the end and gestured for me to go in. It was a small, plain bedroom with a bare mattress on the floor and a single lamp in the corner giving off a weak, yellow light. The room felt cold and dead. He followed me inside and closed the door behind us. The click of the lock echoed in the tiny space. "The others just need to journey," he said, his voice now a low whisper. "But you require a soul retrieval." Inside the small bedroom, the air was thick and still. The faint smell of incense was gone, replaced by a stale, dusty odor. The kind, gentle facilitator who had led me down the hall was no longer there. His whole posture had changed. He wasn't a calm guide anymore. He was standing with his back to the locked door, blocking the only way out. His voice, when he spoke again, was completely different. The warmth was gone. It was flat and cold. "The soul retrieval is the easy part," he said, his eyes now narrow and hard. "That's not your real problem. The real problem is the attachment." I was so confused. The walls of the room seemed to be gently pulsing, and the weak yellow light from the lamp felt heavy. I didn't know what he was talking about. Attachment to my grief? To my dad? I just stared at him. my mind trying to piece together his words through the thick, buzzing fog of the San Pedro. He took a step closer. "It's not a spiritual attachment. Not in the way you think," he said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "The medicine is showing me. There are dark spirits, entities from the lower worlds, and they've attached themselves to your bank account." My brain just stopped. Bank account? I thought I must have misheard him. The drug was making everything sound like nonsense. But he kept talking, his voice turning threatening. "They are feeding on it, siphoning your life force through your money. This isn't about your father. This is a spiritual infestation. It has to be cleansed, and it has to be cleansed now, while the portal is open." He took another step, and his shadow fell over me where I sat on the bare mattress. The kind, patient facilitator was completely gone. His face was hard and tight, all the gentle lines erased. "The portal won't stay open forever," he said. His voice was no longer calm and deep. It was a low growl. "We have to cleanse it now." He leaned down, and his hand shot out, grabbing my upper arm. His grip was like a vice. He wasn't guiding me anymore. He was holding me down. "Tell me the number," he said, his face just inches from mine. I could smell stale coffee on his breath. The room was pulsing gently, the San Pedro making everything soft and indistinct. But his voice was sharp like a needle. I just stared at him, my brain unable to connect the words to anything real. "Your PIN," he hissed, and he gave my arm a violent shake. "The number for your card. The spirits are hiding it. You have to say it out loud to break their power." And just like that, everything shattered. The last bit of hope, the insane idea that this was for my father, it all just turned to dust. This wasn't a ceremony. It was a mugging. He was a predator who had found the weakest person in the herd, and he was using my grief as a weapon to rob me. I was trapped, my mind was poison, and I was completely, utterly helpless. I heard a small, thin voice speak the 4 numbers of my PIN. It took me a second to realize it was my own. He let go of my arm. A flicker of a smile crossed his lips. "Good," he said. "They're losing their grip." Then the act just dropped completely. "Now give me your wallet." My hands were trembling so badly I could barely get them into my pocket. I pulled it out and held it towards him. He snatched it from my fingers, quickly opened it to see my bank card, and shoved it into his own pocket. He had everything. My money, my hope. All of it. Gone. He shoved the wallet in his pocket. He turned and unlocked the bedroom door without another word. I just sat on the mattress, my body buzzing, my brain completely empty. After a moment, he looked back at me. "The cleansing isn't finished," he said. The facilitator's calm voice returning like a mask being put back on. "We need to release the negative energy outside." He led me back down the hall, past the living room where the other 3 people were still sitting with their eyes closed, lost in their own journeys. He didn't take me to the front door I came in. He led me through the kitchen to a back door that opened into a narrow, dark space. He gave me a gentle push. "The spirits are expelled," he said, and then he closed the door behind me. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. I was standing in a back alley. The sudden cold air hit me like a slap. The world was still soft and breathing from the San Pedro, the brick walls gently pulsing, and the distant sound of traffic morphing into a low growl. It was dark, and it smelled of wet garbage and piss. It took me a few minutes to understand. I had been thrown out like trash, He was gone. My hands were still shaking, but I managed to get my phone out of my pocket. The screen was blindingly bright, the icons swimming. I don't know why I did it. I guess some small, sober part of my brain needed to see it for itself. I opened my banking app. I watched the little circle spin, and then the number appeared. 0. The account was completely empty. He had drained every last cent. The thing is, I've thought about that moment 1,000 times, and the money is barely a footnote. The money was just money. The real theft happened before he ever asked for my PIN. He didn't just steal my savings, he stole my hope. He took the most vulnerable and sacred part of me, my grief for my father, and he saw it not as pain, but as an opportunity. He turned my desperation for a moment of connection into a simple, dirty trick. He proved to me that my deepest wound was just a tool for someone else. And that's a special kind of poison. It leaves you more than just broke. It leaves you believing that there are no saviors, no shamans, no healing. There are only predators, and there are marks, and I'll never again be sure which one I'm talking to. I'm in recovery now. I have rules. Most of them are for me, but the biggest one, the hardest one, is for someone else. No contact, no matter what. His name is Alex, and he was my first friend. We learned to ride bikes together on the same street. We were best men at each other's weddings. For 30 years, he was more my brother than my actual brother. But the Alex I grew up with is gone. He's been gone a long time. The heroin took him. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, quiet replacement. At first, he just seemed tired all the time. Then he started losing weight. Then he lost his job. He was still the same charming, funny guy, but it became an act. The charm was a tool he used to get a 20 from you, and the jokes were a smokescreen to hide the track marks on his arms. For years, my life revolved around his addiction. Every phone call was a new crisis, a new, elaborate story about a stolen wallet or a landlord who needed cash right now. He knew exactly what to say. He'd talk about our childhood, about inside jokes from 20 years ago, reminding me of the person he used to be. He was a master at making me feel like his only hope. Like I was the one person who hadn't given up on him. He made my love for him feel like a weakness, and he leveraged it every single time. I had to cut him off to save myself. My therapist calls it a boundary. It feels like an amputation. I know it's the right thing to do. I know that every dollar I ever gave him went straight into a needle. But some nights I lie awake and the guilt just eats at me. I think about him out there somewhere, cold or hungry or sick. And I'm haunted by this one question that I can't ever seem to answer. Where does love end, and where does enabling begin? I still don't know. The no contact lasted for 4 months. 4 months of silence that was both a relief and a constant, low-grade ache. Then, one night, my phone lit up with his name. Alex. Every cell in my body screamed not to answer it. My therapist's voice was in my head, reminding me of the boundary, of the amputation. I answered anyway. At first, I couldn't even understand him. It wasn't words, just a horrible, strangled weeping, a gasping, wet sound that I knew all too well. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin and broken. He said he was going to kill himself. He said the withdrawal was so bad he couldn't see straight, that he was violently dope sick, and he couldn't take it for another second. He kept repeating my name over and over, like a prayer. Then came the words I'd been waiting years to hear. "I'll go," he sobbed. "I swear to God, I'll go to rehab. I'll do it this time. I promise. I'm done. I'm so fucking done. He was crying so hard, he could barely get the words out, and a stupid, dangerous part of my heart believed him. The hope I thought I'd killed off started to stir. And then came the favor. The one last thing he needed from me. He said he was too sick to even walk, too sick to meet his guy. He begged me, just this once. Could I just go get it for him? Could I be the middleman? He swore it was the last time. He just needed to get well, he said. Just one last time so he wasn't shaking and puking on the floor when he checked himself into treatment an hour later. I knew it was a performance. I knew it was a lie, crafted perfectly to hit every one of my weaknesses. But all I could see was him at 5 years old, falling off his bike and me helping him up. All I could hear was the little voice in the back of my head whispering, "What if he's not lying this time? What if you say no and he's dead tomorrow?" I broke my rule. I broke it for the 1,000th time. I told him yes. I hung up the phone and my hand was shaking. I told myself it wasn't a choice. It was a trade. A bag of heroin in exchange for a life I wasn't ready to lose. I convinced myself it was a merciful act. The last one. He texted me an address for his dealer. It was on the other side of town, in a neighborhood I only ever drove through with my doors locked. I went to an ATM and pulled out $300. The whole thing was fast and anonymous. I parked on the street he told me to, and a man I'd never seen before got in my passenger seat. He didn't look at me. I handed him the cash, and he dropped a small, tightly wrapped ball of plastic into my hand. Then he got out and was gone. I sat there for a full minute, the little ball feeling heavy and hot in my palm. I had just bought heroin. For the first time in my life, I was holding it. I told myself again that this was medicine. This was the dose that would save him. I drove to Alex's apartment. The lobby smelled like cat piss and stale cigarette smoke. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. I knocked on his door and waited. When he opened it, the smell from inside hit me like a physical blow. It was the smell of rot. Piles of fast food bags, overflowing ashtrays, old clothes. The room was dark, the only light coming from a muted TV. There was a dirty mattress on the floor in the corner. But the worst part wasn't the apartment. It was him. He wasn't the weeping, hysterical man from the phone. The desperation was gone. He looked at me with clear, focused eyes. He was perfectly, unnervingly calm. I knew right then. The dope sickness was an act. The whole thing was a script, and I had played my part perfectly. I felt a cold wave of shame wash over me, so strong it made me feel dizzy. I held out the little plastic ball. He took it without saying a word. He turned his back to me and walked over to a small table. He unwrapped the ball and started preparing everything. The spoon, the lighter, the cotton. I felt frozen. I should have just left. I should have walked out and never looked back. But I just stood there, watching him. After a moment, he turned around. He had the loaded syringe in his hand. He held it out to me. "I can't," he said, his voice completely flat. "My hands are shaking too bad. You have to do it." He held the loaded syringe out to me. The needle caught the weak light from the TV. And in that one single moment, everything went completely quiet in my head. The 30 years of friendship, the guilt, the stupid, stubborn hope, it all just evaporated. The hysterical man on the phone was gone. The weeping, suicidal friend was gone. All that was left was a parasite and its host, and he was asking me to feed him. I didn't say a word. I just looked at his hand, then at his face. His eyes were empty. There was nothing there to save. I took the syringe from him. For a second, a flicker of something, relief maybe, crossed his face. I didn't throw it. I didn't break it. I just turned and set it down carefully on the dirty table next to his spoon and his lighter. Then I turned back to him. "No," I said. It was the only word I spoke. It was the only word left. He just stared at me. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He didn't cry. He just watched me as I walked out of the room, closed the door behind me, and left him there with his medicine. I walked down the 3 flights of stairs, out of that building, and into the night. It wasn't an amputation anymore. It was just closing a coffin on something that had been dead for a very long time. That was the last time I ever saw him. I learned later that he overdosed and died in that apartment 2 weeks later. And the thing that haunts me is not the guilt of saying no. It's the scar left by what he asked me to do. It was the final lesson. He didn't just want me to enable him. He wanted me to be a participant. He wanted to make me like him, to pull me down into the filth so I could never look down on him again. When you go through enough of these things, you start to see the pattern. It's not about the drugs. It was never about the brown sugar in the bag, the NBO me on the blotter, the San Pedro in the cup, or the heroin in the needle. Those are just the tools. The real poison is the person who gives it to you. The friend who watches you make a fool of yourself for their own amusement. The stranger who sees your grief as an angle. The dealer who knows you're so desperate for a perfect moment that you'll buy a bag of lies. The brother who uses your love like a loaded gun against you. They find the most vulnerable part of you, your hope, your trust, your fear, your love, and they prove to you that it's a liability. They teach you that there are no saviors. There are only predators, and there are marks. The only question is how many times you have to be a mark before you learn to see them coming. The only thing you take away from it all is the scar that teaches you to never, ever trust anyone completely again. I knelt down on the floor in front of him. My own hand was shaking, the syringe feeling alien and heavy. I tapped the side of it, just like I'd seen in movies, getting a tiny air bubble out. I told myself this was the right thing to do. It was mercy. It was the price I had to pay to get him into that rehab door. One last time. He held out his arm, showing me the crook of his elbow. I wiped it with an alcohol swab from his little kit. My eyes were focused on his arm, on the faint blue lines under his pale skin. I was trying to do it right, trying to be steady. And that's when he moved. It wasn't a twitch from withdrawal. It was fast and smooth. With his free hand, he reached behind his back. In one single fluid motion, he dropped the syringe I had been holding and brought up another one. It was already full. Before my brain could even process what I was seeing, he lunged. He wasn't weak or dope sick. He was strong. His hand clamped around my upper arm like a steel trap. I tried to pull back, but his grip was absolute. And then I felt it. A sharp, burning sting in my bicep. I looked down and saw the new syringe, his syringe, pushed deep into my arm. He slammed the plunger down with his thumb. It wasn't a high. It was an off switch. A tidal wave of pure cement that hit my brainstem and just shut everything down. I felt my lungs instantly seize, like they'd been flash frozen. I tried to take a breath, but there was nothing there to pull. The air was a solid wall. My vision dissolved into a black, roaring static. The last thing I felt was the ice-cold, murderous shock of the betrayal. And as the darkness swallowed me completely, I could feel his hands roughly forcing their way into my pockets. The next thing I remember wasn't a thought. It wasn't a light. It was a sound. A violent, gasping heave of air being forced back into lungs that had forgotten how to work. My own. I felt a brutal, burning pain in my nose, and my chest seized in a way that felt like it was tearing itself apart. I was on the floor, on the filthy carpet of Alex's apartment, and there were strangers in uniforms standing over me. Paramedics. One of them was yelling at me, his voice right in my ear. "Stay with me. Can you hear me? You're okay." But I wasn't okay. The world was a smear of blurry light and noise. I could feel the cold on my skin where my pockets had been turned inside out. My wallet was gone. My phone was gone. Alex was gone. The needle was still on the floor next to me. They asked me what I took. I didn't know what to say. The truth was too insane to be believed. My best friend tried to murder me for a few $100s. It sounded like a line from a bad movie. So I just shook my head. They put me on a gurney and carried me down the 3 flights of stairs. I remember seeing the faces of neighbors peeking out their doors, the same blank, incurious stares you give something you don't want to get involved with. In the ambulance, a cop asked me if I wanted to press charges. I remember looking at him, the fluorescent lights of the ambulance ceiling strobing in my eyes, and I just laughed. It was a horrible, dead sound. Press charges? It felt like asking if I wanted to press charges against gravity for a fall. It was just a force of nature. It was what he was. That was the last story, the final exhibit. When you experience enough of these moments, enough betrayals, enough scams, you stop seeing them as isolated events. They start linking together, forming a single, coherent picture of the world. The lesson isn't about drug safety. It was never about test kits or trusted dealers or set and setting. Those are rules for a world that plays fair. The real lesson is that your hope is a liability. Your trust is a vulnerability to be exploited. Your love is a lever that someone else can pull. The con artist who sells you a bag of brown sugar, the sadist who films your terror for a laugh, the fake shaman who weaponizes your grief, the junkie who uses your 30 years of friendship to load a syringe. They aren't different people. They are the same person. They are the predator who stands on the other side of a line. On one side are the marks, the believers, the ones who think this time might be different. On the other side are the ones who know it never is. The scar you're left with isn't a fear of drugs. It's a fear of people. It's the quiet, permanent knowledge that the worst thing in the world isn't a bad trip or an overdose. The worst thing in the world is the person who will watch you go through it or put you through it without a flicker of hesitation. You survive, but the trust doesn't. You learn to see the world through a sheet of bulletproof glass. You can see everyone on the other side, but you can never really touch them. And they can never again touch you. It's a safe way to live. But God, it is so incredibly lonely.